We are live and recording. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Happy Saturday. Now, this Saturday, we have a very, very special book that we are celebrating. It is Sword, Stone, Table. You have to say the title with some gravitas to it. And I am very excited because our fearless leader for today's event is going to be Jenn, who is the center upward panel for me. And she is going to be in conversation with contributing authors, Ausma, who is right above me, Maria, who is my opposite lower. If you all just, instead of awkwardly pointing, Maria has the magnificent goblet. That will be the identifier. And then Anthony, who is right next to me, who has the beautiful background. And then Alex, who is in the upper left-hand corner. Now, I'm just going to do a quick intro so that we can pass it off to Jenn, who is one of the two editors for this phenomenal collection. But I don't normally read little snippets or like blurbs, but I loved this one because, and you'll understand why it says, from the vast lore surrounding King Arthur, Camelot, and the Knights of the Round Table comes an anthology of gender-bent, race-bent, LGBTQIA plus inclusive retellings. And that is, oh no, I'm echoing, which means I got to go and pass it off to the authors.
It's good.
Okay, but that is just a little snippet to essentially tell you this book is full of stories of badassery and awesomeness that you're going to fall in love with. And I'm going to pass it off to Jenn, and you'll get to hear a little bit from all of the authors about their stories and who they are. But before I do, just a little house rule. To the right-hand side, we have the chat section. So say hello. We will be over there. We will be in the chat saying hello to y'all. And then if you look down below where it says ask a question, I highly encourage you to hit that button. The best part of events is that you get to ask the authors questions, pry their brains, be like, how did you come up with this? And on top of that, you have a handful of amazing authors, not just one author's brain you get to poke. So make sure you take advantage of that. And then also, most importantly, exactly, it's time for the finger poking directional. If you look down below, there will be a beautiful button that says purchase books. I would highly encourage you to hit that button so that you can support all of these authors, this amazing anthology. As Alex said in the comments, make sure you ask those questions and grill them. Ask them the thought-provoking things.
Let's get real Frost Nixon here.
Exactly. Oh, and if you hear any screaming as well, apparently I'm just going to read Alex's comments now. If you hear screaming, it's fine. It's just children. Don't worry about it. But on that note, I will pass it off to Jenn, and I will see you all at the end of the event. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Constance. And thank you to Mysterious Galaxy for hosting us. I worked in independent bookstores for years, and it is so lovely to be doing these events with indies like Mysterious Galaxy. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you for hosting, and thank you to the authors who are here with us tonight. So excited to talk to you. I am Jenn Northington. I wrangle spreadsheets and podcasts at Book Riot, among other things, and I am the co-editor of Sword, Stone, Table, along with Swapna Krishna, who is in the comments. So you can say hello to her there. Hi, Swapna. But yeah, we didn't have enough boxes on screen for everyone. So I am moderating this one, and I'm so excited to be here. But so before we really dive into the questions that I have prepared, I wanted to give all of our writers a chance to introduce themselves and tell you a little teeny bit about their stories. So we're going to go in alphabetical order, and I have made them figure out what that is.
But you're saying alphabetical by first name, I believe, right?
By first name.
Okay, Alex, you're first.
All right. Well, okay. Yeah. My name is Alex Segura. I am super honored to be here. I've got a little bit of echo. My story is called Black Diamond, and it's a Latinx baseball noir about a minor league baseball player kind of hitting the end of his career named Arturo Reyes. And he comes across an old baseball manager who's been kind of a mentor to him, and he passes a bat with some extra abilities to him, and it changes his career and his life irrevocably. In terms of who I am, I'm a novelist and comic book writer. I've written Poe Dameron Freefall, a Star Wars novel, a lot of Archie comics, and a lot of crime novels. My next novel, Secret Identity, comes out next March from Flatiron Books, and it's a comic book noir set in 1975 New York.
Cool. I'm next.
You're next.
It's AL to AN. I'm Anthony Rapp. I'm coming to you from a beautiful winery at Santa Cruz, California. So that's why this is not virtual. It's real trees and real sky. My story is called Jack and Brad and the Magician, and it's about a young gay couple in the early 90s in New York, in the middle of the height of the AIDS crisis, and they meet a certain magician. And he kind of alters slightly the course of things for them. I guess I don't want to say too many more spoilers about that. Other than that, you might recognize the magician. He's pretty recognizable. And I'm also an actor, but I was very honored. Swapna Krishna actually reached out and asked me to write a story for this anthology, and I was thrilled at that opportunity. And it's been a dreamy thing. So that's me. Ausma, I think you are next.
Ausma, yes. My name is Ausma Zehanat Khan, and I'm the author of the story The Once and Future Qadi, which is set sort of in a mystical past, and it's part dark fantasy, part romance, and part crime. And an Islamic judge from Cordoba is asked to come and judge the fidelity of Queen Guinevere by interrogating the main players, namely Guinevere, Lancelot, and any possible witnesses. But it's kind of an examination also of how the East looks at the West compared to what the script we usually see of the West looking at the East. I'm now a full-time writer. I wrote a crime series called the Khatakeri crime series with a Canadian Muslim detective as the lead detective investigating crimes related to global human rights issues. And I've also written a fantasy quartet called the Khorasan Archives, which examines some of the most compelling human rights issues in Afghanistan today. It's sort of set along a broken Silk Road in different parts of the Muslim world. And I've also written a middle grade nonfiction book on Ramadan. And I have a new crime series coming out next year starring Inaya Rahman, a Muslim woman investigator in Colorado, where I currently live. So thanks, and thank you so much, all of you, for being here.
Cool.
Okay, I'm the only one who doesn't have an A first name. It's true, it's you too. But are you before me? Did I just jump on top of you? I'm sorry.
No, I already did me, so you know.
You kicked it off.
Okay, I'm Maria Dahvana Headley. I am a writer in kind of every genre and every form. Most recently, I did a new translation of Beowulf. I also have written some young adult novels. I wrote a novel called The Mere Wife, which is like Beowulf from the women's POV. And my story is called Mayday, and it's like Arthur and Merlin in the American West in the mid-1800s, and Mordred. I was given the Mordred slot. I came late to this anthology, and there was no Mordred story. So they said, "Can you do a Mordred story?" And I said, "I don't know." And I did one. Mordred as a muckraker list. So that's what I did for this anthology.
Yeah, Maria was very kind because we did have, we were looking at, we had room for one more story, and I realized we had no Mordred, and I was like, I personally am so invested in that character, and I was like, Maria, will you tell us a Mordred story? And she's like, it's not really my character, but then everything sort of came together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It fell into place weirdly. I mean, lots of difficult people in the mid-1800s in America, as it turns out. So it was fine.
That's a very, like, that you're reaching for it saying that. I mean, who are you talking about?
It's an understatement.
Yes.
Yeah, no joke.
Wow.
Oh, all right. Well, okay. So I have so many questions for y'all, and we're going to start super specific because you all have worked in sci-fi and fantasy in various ways, along with all of the other amazing things that you do. And so I was wondering, when you started working on your story, how did you decide what kind of magical or sci-fi elements, if any, to include? Because there's a lot of room in Arthuriana for the mystical, the not so mystical. Like, how do you pick? So let's see. Let's start with, Maria, let's start with you, because you actually went in a way that I was not expecting you to go.
Well, I decided to make a a kind of catalog, an auction catalog of objects discovered in the 70s in a lighthouse on West Sister Island, which is the only wilderness area in Ohio. And it is, so it's on Lake Erie. It's a pretty remote island. And I don't know how that happened. I decided to sort of answer the question of the kind of Merlin enchambering with a lighthouse. And the magical elements in this story are people trying to work the system that is built for sort of white settlers and white people coming in and smashing down cultures that exist before them. The mostly magical elements of this story are kind of Old West show elements of kind of like Deadwood kind of style, and women who are scientists. Science and magic have a lot of overlap. So I decided to entwine those two things and use a ton of history and real history of women and indigenous women, women of color, like kicking ass in the mid 1800s in America, unrecognized and unwritten about. So the sort of ladies of the lake characters are all American women who are indigenous women. And it's all real. It's all real history. I used the most magical things in here kind of are real history because there are women who did this before everyone else and did it and were never written about. So it was an interesting thing to get to do. And it was fun to get to do the Merlin parts of the story based on a real person. I based the story on Coxey's Army, which is a populist presidential candidate, kind of Trumpian, but ish the other side, like taking a march across the country to run for president, wanting to do in the middle of a depression, wanting to do like a roads and highways bill. And so that guy is real, Coxey. I based my Arthur character on him. I based my Mordred character on a muckraking journalist who wrote about him. And it's just all entwined. But I think that reality is magical. So all of the Arthurian magic in those stories also, I think, feels like often the sort of medieval reality of weather magic and, oh my God, what is happening? It must be magic. Like a lot of the things that happen in those stories also is real world things that now have scientific explanations, but at that point seemed wondrous,
Ausma, you did historical as well, but you went farther back.
Yes. I was kind of looking at the time of Muslim rule in Spain. So that period called the Convivencia. And what's magical, I think, in my story is that it's as if King Arthur existed in real time at the same time as the Caliphate in Spain. And then sort of the subtext through the whole story is the Crusades. So this Muslim judge and his squire have come from the Crusades and will be returning to the Crusades to fight for the Holy Land. And supposedly Lancelot's going off to do the same thing in pursuit of the Holy Grail. And many of the knights have been on the Crusades and are coming back from the Crusades. So there's this sort of subtle contest of wills of who's a better knight, who's a better fighter, who will prevail in the Crusades. So for me, that was a really magical element. I didn't bring in things like Merlin or genuine magic because for me, that situating of that history as if it was real for King Arthur too. And then these great characters of the East and the West having this dialogue about their prophets, their kings, their heroes, and sort of verbally tussling with each other. The dialogue was very magical for me.
Yeah. Well, let's just keep moving chronologically then. So Anthony, you're sort of next if we go forward, and you've got like some touches in there.
I was mostly inspired by T.H. White's version of Merlin in the sense that all that text he had about him going back and forth in time and all the anachronistic things that he experienced that he would refer to and people would be like, what are you talking about kind of thing. So that was one of the seeds. So that's what inspired me to place him then. But then I was also really interested in the limitations of his particular magic, that he was not, he didn't have any healing magic. He only had like illusions and the time travel thing and sort of his confusion about that. And then he could make something like sparkly, but he couldn't heal somebody. So that was of interest to me. So that's one of the ways that I explored it. what does somebody who has the ability to do something shiny and cool but can't really change someone's life, really, what does that do to him?
But at the end of your story, boy, was I wishing he had that magical power.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, no doubt. And Alex, I think magic is also a very subtle presence, or questionable even, in your story.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned it that way, because I think it really depends on how you read it. I don't want to give away the whole plot, but Arturo's given a bat, and obviously it changes his trajectory. His father, I should step back. Sports, I have a weird relationship with sports. I love sports in that it was something I did with my dad and bonded with. I remember listening to a lot of sports radio as a kid after my parents got divorced, so there's a lot of soothing aspects to it. So I wanted to write a sports noir, but there are supernatural aspects if you look at it that way. I mean, the bat can be seen as a mystical item, but also there's a Merlin type character, but it can also be read as a straight, kind of crime story. And I wanted to play with that and really, the weight of legacy. Arturo's trying to live up to his dad's success. He's when you read the story, you realize he was murdered at a very critical juncture in his career, and then Arturo's kind of spent his life trying to catch up to his dad. But if you can also read it as there's a very pivotal scene towards the end that can be read as supernatural, but it's not a weighty element to the whole story.
Yeah.
Like a whisper.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a splatter of supernatural.
A soupçon.
Yeah, a little spice.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so let's zoom out a little bit then, and Alex, let's stay with you for this one. So you've written crime, you've written comics, you've written in so many different ways. How is writing an Arthur story different from or similar to all of those other things?
I loved it because I could blend all those things into one. I think sometimes as a publishing industry, we get too locked into genre, and it's really, as a marketing person, I see it as it's a marketing thing. That's literally where you shelve the book. It shouldn't limit how you are creatively. And so the fun about short stories is that you can start as a crime story, but then sprinkle in other things. I'm just going to speak in like cooking terms from now on. But you can add a dollop of supernatural and time travel or things like that. And I found it to be really liberating, and I could blend all these things that I like to do into one thing.
Nice. And Ausma, you've jumped genres also. I mean, I think really all of you have. So that's why I wanted to ask this question, honestly. So how did you approach it?
Well, when you and Swapna approached me, you told me that you were looking for a crime story. So I sort of set my mind to it and said, okay, what do I know about the whole oeuvre about Arthuriana, and what could be a crime there? And I kept thinking about Guinevere and Lancelot and how that could play out in different ways. But the more I played with it, the more I realized it had these beautiful romantic elements. It had these beautiful, fantastic elements. And it was just really nice not to have to be pigeonholed into one genre, but to play all of that out, give each of the characters their moment on the stage, so the reader could judge for themselves what they think of the Qadi, what they think of Guinevere, what they think of Lancelot, and sort of to tweak the common perceptions that we have of these very heroic figures and make them very human and sort of bring them down to a much smaller scale. And then see how they interact with their contemporaries from part of the world that they haven't visited but have a great influence on.
Yeah. Maria, what about you?
Well, I've been all over the genre map. I've written like all kinds of things. I don't really believe in genre. I just think kind of everything is one big fat story, So, and I'm always fascinated by the things that are like all over classical literature and canonical literature. There's fantastical material. There are monsters and dragons, and but those things are sort of not discussed, or it's discussed as this is important despite the dragon. And I just think that fantastical elements are part of human ways of spreading story and dealing with the events of life. Like sometimes magic goes in because life is so startling and jarring, and it's also a way to get people to keep telling the story. So like in an oral tradition, that's how that keeps going, is like, and then there's a monster, But it's also sometimes it's a toxic element. Sometimes the ongoing like tradition of monsterization is a questionable situation in the story. It spreads, and then people are like, yes, monsters are real, and they're my neighbor. So in this story, I guess I was at the end of 7 years of working on Beowulf when I worked on this story. And I was feeling really burned by the Hall versus the Wild elements of the Beowulf story. And I wanted to look at the notion of halllessness, of dealing with nature without trying to have a hall, and the idea of different ways of doing that. So this story is kind of a nature journal. I don't know. I've never written anything quite like it before, and it was so hard. And as I was writing it, my partner was like, "This is a short story, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah," because I feel like maybe it's like Pillars of the Earth. Maybe it's like 3,000 pages of novel, and it might be. I don't know. I came in for someone whose story, The Gap, was created by my friend Nicola Griffith, whose story turned into a novel as she was working on it. And I had this dark feeling that my story was also going to turn into a novel as I was working on it, because it started to just it was a whole century. And like in terms of genre, I don't know. I mean, like it was really fun to get to do something that was its form was kind of different because it's an auction catalog, but it was interesting to imagine 100 years of history and imagine the way America's wilderness changed over 100 years of history, changed from something wild, completely unprotected, into something that had protected elements. And sometimes there were people who did that. So I wanted to talk about some of those people, and some of them I made up, but it was the actions of people who were heroes of the wilderness in America.
Yeah. Well, I do both appreciate you not immediately turning into a novel, and also want the novels. I want to have my cake and eat it too.
Like there's so much in it that
I feel like a lot of the stories felt there was so much potential for all the stories to just keep going. You wanted to just live in those worlds.
Yeah. I, for example, want to know who killed Arturo's father. Who really killed him?
Dun dun.
And Anthony, you've worked in all kinds of genres as well. You've written memoir, you've done fiction before, but I guess under the radar, and then you've acted in all kinds of different genres. So how did this feel similar, different?
Well, first to talk about genre, in the past year, it was the first time I read Beloved by Toni Morrison, and I could not believe that I had no idea that it was a ghost story. That it's it's just incredible that is just discarded as part of the discourse about it. It is an entirely a ghost story. Spoiler alert. But anyway, so I've always held this huge regard for any kind of literature that deals with anything, and if you have those elements, great. If it helps illuminate an aspect of the human experience. It did occur to me, I was basing aspects of some things like Hearts and Voices, this group that I talk about in the story was a group that I participated in. I went into AIDS wards myself with fellow performers and did that kind of work. And I never witnessed a magician, but I'm sure that the magicians were among the kinds of people that were brought in. But it did occur to me, okay, there may be people who would find that weird to then have this surreal or fantastical element when it's this realistic world, but then I just committed to it, and I just trust that people will sort of follow it along, and if they don't, then oh well, I guess. But it was very meaningful to get the chance to enter into I'm such an avid reader of so much kind of literature, especially excellent fantastical literature, that it was an honor to be a part of a community of artists who are doing that kind of work. So thank you again for welcoming me into it.
Yeah, it's so true that all of these stories have felt, to steal from Dr. Who, bigger on the inside. There's so much going on in all of them, and they've all been such a pleasure to work on, and I'm so excited that they're now out in the world and people are getting to experience them. So my next question for you all, and this is 100% because we're heading into con season, although it's going to be like a very different kind of con season. And Mysterious Galaxy has been a pivotal presence, I think, at San Diego Comic-Con for so long. And so I was thinking about that, and then the Marvel movie phenomenon is just enormous. And I found myself thinking today, I threw this question in last minute, but now I can't stop thinking about it, so now I'm making it your problem. Are Arthur and his knights OG super, are they historical superheroes and villains, or no? And if no, why not? And I can't quite figure out where I land on it. And so I was wondering if that strikes anything for any of you, yes, no, maybe. What do you think?
I think it's kind of the. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I sort of think Greek gods when I think of that, maybe.
Okay.
The pantheon, the pantheon, and then they were infighting and incest and etc. That's one of the groups, but I do think that there's something to what you're saying too, in terms of people who were on the earth and living among us, who had these legendary adventures. Then that certainly also really rings true.
Yeah, I think superheroes are modern mythology, so that you can kind of flip it and see it from that perspective. They connect that way.
I think a lot of these stories are ways to talk about hierarchical power and also to talk about responsibility, to talk about, if you have these Arthurian heroes, you can also say, well, we're not responsible for the troubles in the Empire because there was a whole thing that happened before us. So you can sort of imagine the big, the big sort of scapegoat glamour. Scapegoat. What is a scapegoat? Not what I'm trying to say. A scapegoat glamour. The scapegoat god. The god did it, and it wasn't me. And they absorbed it. So the end of the Arthurian story, where Arthur goes into hibernation, has always been really interesting to me. The idea that he would pogo out of his cave and come and save everybody, and the idea that is a sort of dormant god figure, tells us something about the ongoing yearning for someone to save you, even though life is problematic and hard over and over and over again, and the stories keep letting us know that. So it's interesting, and I think that's akin to some of the superhero stuff. Yeah.
I don't know, Ausma, what do you think?
I think it kind of reflects the human desire for the ideal, for perfection, for nobility and justice. And sure, there's some overlap with that. And superhero canon, it's also supposedly figures larger than life who are embodying nobility and justice despite their personal flaws. And it's kind of our world is dark and terrible and filled with cruelty, but here's these people who behave with great gentility and chivalry and sacrifice, and they speak beautifully and they act beautifully, and their struggles aren't against real things, because that would make them much more human, but against these fantastical elements. So I think part of it is that it's a bit of escapism and a bit of a desire to recognize the better parts of ourselves.
Yeah, I think the shorthand is always that, the DC superheroes are a pantheon of gods like Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman, whereas the Marvel heroes are people with powers. And so you can see a lot of overlap, like Anthony was saying, the Greek gods or the Arthurian pantheon too. I mean, they're closer, I guess, to the Marvel heroes.
Yeah. And also only heroes in their own eyes, right? Because their actions are so often monstrous to those on the other end of them, which you've all approached in some way or another.
Really questionable choices made by every character in this canon. Bad choices.
Yeah. Well, thank you for validating my question. And I know that came out of sort of nowhere. I appreciate that you all were so articulate about it. Let's see. Oh, wow. We're coming up on audience questions, and I see that there are some already. So let's go do some of those. Okay. So Amelia is asking, which story from the realm of King Arthur is your favorite?
Oh, well, from reading The Once and Future King, that stuff, I forgive me for not remembering names really well. The stuff between there's that whole section in, I think it's book 2 or book 3, but where the two brothers then like wind up killing each other. Like they go to like all that stuff was just heartbreaking. And I did not see coming from any prior knowledge that I'd had about the Arthurian legends. That was a whole area that was just like, it was so wild. Like their crazy upbringing, their terrible upbringing, and then what they became later and how that played out was really, really intense. So I like dark and intense things. So that was one of them for me. But what are their names? Please forget who's the expert that can remember what I'm talking about. Somebody in chat. I don't know.
Yeah, somebody in chat. It's been too long.
There are some Arthurians in there, I think.
Yeah.
Save it for the chat.
The Queen of Air and Darkness. But the boys, the two guys, what were their names? Anyway, it's all good. But that was one that really got me.
Mine is much more prosaic. I sort of not even prosaic, but really, really down to earth and lowbrow. I used to love this British TV series called Merlin. It ran for 5 seasons, and I absolutely adored it. The costumes and the sets were so good, and the lead actors were hilarious. And Merlin was my favorite character because he was kind of like the butt of all the jokes, but he had this power that he was growing into. But what I really loved about that series was the brotherhood they portrayed between Arthur and Merlin, and how they deeply love each other, and it's manifested in all these sacrifices they have to make. So that's from the contemporary realm. And I think what I've loved most in the mythology is the sword. I just find it absolutely fabulous. The power of the sword, how it's acquired, how it disappears, all of that.
That's cool.
Yeah, I mean, I have to echo the sword idea. It plays a big part in my story, but also Camelot 3000 is a fantastic comic book series. It's got amazing art by Brian Bolland, who doesn't really do interior art that often, and so it's really a cool take on the legend in that, you know, Arthur and the Round Table show up in modern times, and what Maria was saying about the ending of the legend. You know, Arthur kind of goes away, but there's always a hint that he'll return. I love stuff like that, and I love kind of continuing sagas. So I was really drawn to that, and not to be super basic, but I love the Sword in the Stone Disney movie as a kid.
Sure.
I also love the T.H. White. I spent my childhood rereading and going, here's the story for me, it's for me. And the idea of like shape-shifting was always like becoming a fish, like all those things, very hunger-making for me. But but had I been like, if I was just going to choose out of everything, I would have gobbled up the, I'm going to say a name. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this name right. I've pronounced it many times in many different ways over the history of my yearning for Arthurian literature. So Nimue, her, that one. Yeah, the student who becomes the master is very interesting to me. And Nisi Shaw's story in this anthology is, I'm obsessed with Nisi Shaw's story about that. It's so beautiful. And the idea of her, learning Merlin's tricks and using them is something I use in a little bit of my story too. But it's, but I just, I always just wanted the book about her. I wanted the book about the sort of savant sorceress, somebody who just comes in and is like, I came with a whole bunch of knowledge that you don't have, and it's not even part of this story. But I'm here and I'm capable of rolling you back. Now you have to go age backwards. Enjoy. Yep. Like just for my personal feelings about the world and patriarchy, that story just hits all my zones of joy.
So good. So good. Oh boy, the questions are pouring in. Okay, next question. From Mysterious Galaxy. Arthurian retellings are having a great comeback. So true. There's so many great retellings coming out right now. What elements of the original story do we think are calling to people now that's making it popular to reimagine and retell? Interesting.
I mean, I think we have a hunger for looking for people to really look up to. I don't know, that's part of it, because we've been through such a dark moment of terrible people being in power all over the world, that maybe that's part of it. Longing for something out there that can solve our problems for us, who can pull out that sword and suddenly everything's okay. I guess something like that maybe is animating some of it.
Yeah, the comfort of heroes.
Yeah, and it's
Totally.
like the Marvel movies are just so continually so super popular. I think it's the same kind of thing, probably.
Yeah, well, I mean, Swapna referred to the King Arthur crossover universe in one of our like events or interviews. I can't remember where it came up. Maybe it was on the Nerdette podcast, but like it does feel like that, like the King Arthur expanded universe. Like there's so much room to talk, to play, and to talk, and to like find those comforting heroes and themes, even out of margin characters and margin moments. So yeah. I mean, that's why we did this, honestly. It just felt like there was room to play and to bring more to us all. And it felt like we needed that.
And the characters are so flexible. There's no like Arthurian continuity or like character guide. It's just so rife for tweaking and tinkering and changing that it makes it really fun to play in that sandbox.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing as well, like the development of courtly language or ideas about what is polite and what is allowed in discourse. And so much of the Arthurian mythology is about that. It's about what you're allowed to do and what you can do and still be good. And I think that we have had a massive wrangling with discourse in the last 5 years, Trumpian discourse, and a massive discussion about like, or sometimes internal discussion about what can you say and have it be viral and not evil? Like, how do you do it? Like, how do you spread knowledge quickly in sort of shorthand version? Like, in my opinion, like the American left has a lot of difficulty with this. Has to explain and explain and explain. And there are characters in the Arthurian mythology who do that thing, and they just end up suffering. They explain for days, and they're left alone in the corner. And then there are like propagandists who go forth and are full of hot air, which is often very virally intriguing to people. Yep. And so like these stories are also about storytelling, and I think that we've really been thinking about storytelling hopefully to the good. Hopefully we're learning how to tell honest stories, not in evil ways. I don't know, we'll see. It's interesting to see where we are right now.
Hope so.
Yeah, fingers very crossed. Mm-hmm. Another question that I liked was, what was your favorite scene to write in your story? I'm gonna put you on the spot with that one.
Well, I guess the scene that I always imagined, I didn't know exactly how it would be, where it would take place exactly, but the scene where Merlin talks to Jack was the scene that was the first seed. I was like, I see them talking to each other, in which Merlin is going to help him understand that the way things are now is not how they're always going to be. So that was the first thing. So that was very satisfying to write that. It was just a matter of then figuring out how to get there. I don't know how you regular time writers always figure out that stuff.
I think it takes a minute. I love this. For me, it was fun writing the scene where Arturo early on gets cut from his minor league team and then goes to his local diner and kind of just like wallows in his own self-pity and then discovers the bat. And that to me was just kind of feeling out the characters. And I think I revised that scene a few times just to get the tone correctly. But in any short story writing, you really need to discover the characters as you're going, because you don't really have the bandwidth to map it out like you would a novel where you can outline and kind of figure out who they are. So that's when I kind of figured out who he was and who the big players were.
Cool.
Mine would be the scene between the judge, the Qadi, Yusuf is his name, and Guinevere. Their battle of words, their duel, because he's using all the elements at his disposal, including his ability to be attractive and seductive to women, to wrongfoot her and get her to make a confession. And she's too slippery and too smart for him. And she's using all her weapons, such as demeaning his history, where he comes from, and his ability to love a woman properly, and all of those things, social class. And so they just go back and forth in this dialogue that got snappier as every time I revised it. It was really, really fun and lighthearted, but at the same time, underneath it, there's this current flowing that's very dangerous and interesting. And if I had more time and more space, I would have played with that much, much more.
Yeah, they were very stabbing each other verbally, for sure. And it's a duel. It feels like a duel.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And I reading that scene, I was like, what's going to happen? Is she going to break? And it's amazing. It's such good writing.
Thank you.
My favorite thing that I wrote, I think here was and this is like, I knew this is where I was going, but I had to go all over 100 years of history to get there, was the Nimue character who's called Mooney in my story. She's like the Wild West show sidekick. She's Annie Oakley kind of, but an Indian woman. And this is a real big spoiler, but it's hopefully the story is worth it. You know what she's going to do to Merlin. She's going to transform him. She's going to ruin his life. And she does. And I got to have her turn him into a gray parrot. And
that was awesome.
And I was trying to get there. I knew that I knew that's where I was going, because I wanted to see Merlin trapped by his own belief that he was just with a sexy young woman, and that he could use her skills and her power for his own like show. And I wanted to see him go down for that in a moment when he thinks he is like the king of everything. And it was really pleasing. It was really fun to write, because the core of the story is the May Day section of the Arthurian mythology, which is Arthur doing something really horrible, like Arthur drowning all of the illegitimate children in an attempt to kill Mordred. And that's part of the mythology that's there. And it always rankled. I was always like, oh, how is this good king? Like, who does this thing? This really questionable thing based on prophecy. So, I thought, okay, well, there's a whole bunch of other really questionable things based on prophecy that people are doing all over the place. And one of them is the channeling of young women's power into status for old men. So I enjoyed doing that more than I enjoyed like death of babies, which was not enjoyable. But I just wanted to like go into some of the dirtiness of the stories about Arthur, who's the hero. I wanted to see some of the things that were pre-existing that people are like, well, oopsie, there was an oopsie there, and it's
not
just sort
his
of
best moment.
Yeah, not his best moment. Like, just doesn't make a major crime, and I'm interested in major crimes and in like the idea of someone having that be like the accidental major crime, because that's just so much part of our society as well. He was just a little drunk and he didn't know what he was doing. And the excuse of that.
Yeah, I loved all of those scenes, all of the scenes, all of the stories, all of the scenes. Let's see. Amelia asks, what are the limitations and freedoms of writing in an existing universe or story or IP versus your own setting?
Who wants to go? I feel like I'm always going first, but I'm ready to go. I feel like there's a nice shorthand to be able to have these details and themes that you can sort of tap into. It's almost like you tap into a line, and that to me is a great jumping off point. So it doesn't have to come totally whole cloth. And in the way that those things can kind of thread through or ripple through, I found very invigorating. And it's sort of like what I do as an actor in terms of taking someone else's text and filtering it through myself to bring to life. So it felt like a similar kind of exercise. So I found it cool in that sense. And then I don't know if any of you guys felt this at all, but just getting over some sense of like, is it presumptuous of me to take this world famous historical character and put my own spin on it? Well, if it is, then so be it. I'll do it anyway. But there's that little moment. Okay.
Is this okay? Yeah. Yeah. I think mythology is a little different than, like actual, IP, because it's flexible by nature. I mean, it's told over time and tweaked and changed. And whereas something like you're playing in a comic book universe or Star Wars or, another established thing, you have a sandbox, but even that, it's like you find your spaces to be creative and you find your ways to adhere to the universe, but still be additive. But this was much more liberating. Where you're just really like just adding to the tapestry.
Ladies.
I have that. Well, I've been working in like other people's universes for a while. I am always interested in other people's universes, but I've also had the great benefit of working in the universes of the long dead. I think that if like working in a universe created by somebody that is Googling themselves in the moment that I'm publishing my like angry critique is I haven't had that challenge, and I think that's pretty challenging. Like, and also the sort of fan universe of the closest I've come has been Beowulf, and Beowulf has that. Like, Beowulf definitely has people who are pretty passionate, I'm going to say, about what happens in Beowulf and how it should be treated. And it was interesting going into the Arthurian mythology and into the Arthurian universe, which is very entwined with the Beowulfian universe in terms of our feelings about what is right and what is proper, and how men speak to one another, and how men speak to one another collegially, and also in moments of like noble battle. And it's an interesting thing to have people feel infuriated because my Beowulf translation starts with the word bro. And people felt all kinds of ways about that. And one of the ways that they felt was that I should be writing it in a more low, or a, hark kind of tone, in a more Arthurian tone, because that's a more proper and distinguished tone. And I'm always interested in like getting everything dirty. Like, I just like to get it dirty. And I don't know, I knew that I was going to get a lot of blowback from a lot of people, like some of them very high profile scholars, some of them just fans, on the ground. And it's the same thing with people having like a longing for the good guy stories and not having them complicated by bad guy problems in the middle, or by sort of social justice warrioring in the middle of it. But like everything I've ever written is that. So it's not, I've tried to be a different person on occasion as a like explorer of the history of stories, but I can't. I have to go in there and like do some slapping. I just cannot help myself. It's not possible for me to be a writer. There's just no other way for me to be a writer. So it's writing in someone else's universe. This is why I'm not writing any comic books with living creation. I would be tired. I would be so tired.
Yes.
I grew up with a different set of mythologies in history. So I read King Arthur legends much later in life. And I kind of instinctively felt myself comparing them to the stories that I grew up with about noble warriors and the conquest of certain lands and so on. And so I could see these similar archetypes. And in both sets of traditions, I'm going to generalize by calling them Eastern and Western, but in both sets of these traditions, there was this common element of almost reverence and veneration for these figures. And so I thought that was an important element to keep, that history, the canonical side of it, and approach the story with reverence, and then let the details of the story break down these figures into their more human elements, which is why I chose the language that I chose. It's a way of speaking common to both the East and the West, high in rhetoric, very complimentary, very courteous. But then underneath that, what are they really saying to each other? What are they really doing to each other? The Qadi is essentially breaking Guinevere down piece by piece. He's seeing all the flaws inside the supposed nobility of Lancelot. So so I wanted to keep the reverent elements, but let the story do the work of breaking it down.
Cool.
Amazing. Constance, do we have time for more, or are we at time?
You can keep going for another 13 minutes. You got the whole hour if you want.
We have the whole hour. Okay, I wasn't sure if we had 45 or an hour. Okay, great. Well, so this is so interesting. Oh my gosh, I feel like I want to go back to the way you put it, Maria, about getting them dirty, getting these stories dirty, because I don't know if the others on the call here feel that would necessarily describe how they did it, but I do like this idea of like calling to task some of these sort of taken for granted, undertones, overtones. It's just such an interesting and fun thing that happened, which was, obviously, again, what we were hoping for is like to interrogate as well as to enjoy, I guess. Like, I feel like both are possible, right? You can love a thing and also really want to get in there and like get into the guts and like pull out the stuff that's hard and problematic and difficult and mess with it to make it new and different. And so I guess I guess I'm trying to turn this into a question here. Is how, like, does it feel good? Does it feel hard? Like, how does it feel to go in and get dirty and messy with something that has like a place in your heart as a fan?
For me, it felt really great, actually, because I was actually, my departure point for the story was a book called The Crusades Through Arab Eyes by the great French-Lebanese writer Amin Maalouf. And I kept thinking about, in his stories about the horrible moments of the Crusades, it was basically breaking down everything you read about the chivalry of knighthood and Christian knights and Christian values. And it was like, these were marauding forces who terrorized indigenous peoples. And so it completely flips the script and your lens changes. So that was a lot of what I wanted to put in my story, that yes, these are, dignified figures, they're noble, they are courtly, they're chivalrous and all of that. But they have this kind of Orientalist take on the East and sort of kind of sneering. When you call someone a Saracen, that's an insult to the people of those lands, or even a Moor, for example. And then there's all these like little feminist elements in my story where Arthur and Guinevere assume that women in Muslim lands are second-class citizens and they're treated very badly. And the whole time in his internal thoughts or internal monologue, the Qadi and his squire are reflecting on the women of their lands and how they think about them and how they treat them. And almost in Yusuf's case, he's thinking of his beloved Lubna, and he's thinking to himself, no matter what he does, he can't seem to win her attention, and he doesn't command her, she commands him. So these were my ways of kind of flipping that script too, and taking that and sort of opening up that pristine mythology and showing that Orientalism, its ugliness, its ugly side, and then flipping that and showing some of the nobility of the caliphate's court. So that was really, really fun to do. Very liberating.
Sure. Yeah, I don't know if I imagine someone's sort of talked about the queer triangle that to me is so self-evident in the Arthur, Lancelot, Jenny in the T.H. White book, but Guinevere triangle. It just, reading his book, it just was so, it was like, could not have been emblazoned on the side of a building more, that Lancelot and Arthur were madly in love with each other and just could not or would not act on it. And Guinevere became the linchpin, became like the they traded between her, and it's sort of like this misplaced thing. So I don't know if it's really looking at the dirty side, but that was my response reading it, and then to be able to sort of filter that into the story just felt like a very natural thing. And then Merlin, I felt, would have had some regret meeting these two men. I feel like, how could he not have some regret that he didn't better impact that with Arthur, who he loved and could see these things were happening and he couldn't intervene. He had that whole thing, like he knew it was going to happen, but he couldn't stop it. So I felt like it made sense that would be another element of what he regretted or felt like he didn't or couldn't do.
Yeah, I think for me, a lot of it was looking at the weight of legacy and expectation, and this idea that to succeed, you have to achieve what was achieved before you. And I think hopefully people get this when they read the story, but Arturo's true happiness doesn't necessarily come by following in his father's footsteps. It's another part of the story. It's his, I don't want to spoil the story, but the success that he achieves, there's two lanes there, and one of them is more meaningful and is outside of even baseball. So
yeah,
I remember reading T.H. White, and also in seeing The Sword in the Stone, and having this feeling as a little girl who I didn't know about gender hierarchy yet. I thought everybody's allowed the same amount of power and potential, and that it's just like obvious. That to me, that seemed obvious. I thought that was the deal. And I remember reading it and thinking about having a mentor, the glory of having a really accomplished mentor who teaches you their shit. And then I got to the Nimue part, and I was like, wait a minute. She has a glorious mentor who's teaching her everything, but there's a whole problem here that's happening, and she's also having to pay in sex. So like the knowledge of that kind of came into my teenage years. Like as a teenage girl, I was starting to realize that was part of the horrible deal societally, and something not acknowledged, that like women were not being promoted into positions without paying, with flirtation and sex and all of those things that seem like they're like part of the deal. And it's sort of trained into young women to have that be part of the deal. And also into gay men as like, you know, sometimes the older male figures who are mentoring are saying, this is what you have to do in order to have any of my power. And it was, so the glory of the mythology is not like, I still want it. I want equal mentoring. Now I'm old. Now I'm the mentor. And I'm like, okay, well, the way that I change that is to not ask for that in return, to ask for nothing in return, but to just like try to teach my power and teach my spells. You know, if I have some spells, I want to teach them to people without them having to pay in questionable ways. And so the journeying of the mythology is more just me going, pull it open, have a look inside, see what's in there. And see what's in there that's not been acknowledged. But still disappointing to me that the glorious thing that should just be a given isn't a given. And my work has consistently always been about trying to make that a given, trying to make like gendered stuff like that not a thing, trying to make it not a thing that in order to get power you have to, you know, sex work is one thing, but to have to pay for like getting intellectual treats and intellectual understanding with sex is a questionable thing, you know. And if that's the way that the literary culture works and that's the way that the intellectual culture works, that's very fucking unfair and has all, you know, long tradition of it being unfair. Like it's not like we have no tradition of that. It's in the tradition. So like to split open the tradition and go, this tradition is toxic, is something that is meaningful to me. So the journeying of the glory in service of getting back to the thing that should exist is the reason it should exist.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. Asma, you just wrote in the chat, all our heroes have feet of clay. That does seem like
So
what
true.
we're talking about, right? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's see. We are coming up on our closing time here. Let's do a quick rapid fire, like lighter question to wrap up on, which was in the asks, which was if you were in the epic magical duel in Sword in the Stone, what would you have turned into? Which is a fun and also tricky one. A fox?
Fox.
Fox. Oh.
Yeah. This is my. Yeah.
Okay. Nice.
Tiger.
Wow.
I have nothing, but I heard fox for fog, and so I'm going to say a fog is also a very useful thing to
Oh,
turn
yeah.
into. I'm into that. Suddenly you're like, nothing.
Yeah. Come get me.
Yeah.
Good
I
night.
heard a thought at first, and I was like, that's impressive. I was like, how does that happen?
Oh, amazing. All right. Well, I wanted to give everybody time before we close to talk about what you're working on next that you want to promote, what you're excited about, where people should find you. So let's go in reverse order. Maria, let's start with you.
Okay. I have a novel coming out from FSG at some point in the next year and a half, 2 years. That's like a imaginary medieval manuscript, like a kind of like Book of Kells situation written by time travelers, which is very queer. It's like a huge queer love story. And I'm excited about it. And I'm also doing an audible version of like a full cast Aeneid, but it's a musical Aeneid. So it's 10 hours long, and I'm like deep in the middle of reshaping the Aeneid to my own ends. You know, the Aeneid's very bro-y, and now I'm up in it.
Cool.
Amazing.
Back reverse order. Ausma. Yeah,
yes, it's
Yes,
Asma.
it's me, right? Asma. You can find me at my website, which I typed in asmazehanatKhan.com. And I have a new crime novel called Blackwater Falls coming out next year. I don't know when exactly. And a short story in the Khatuk and Getty crime series coming out next year, too.
I'm next. Season 4 of Star Trek Discovery is apparently coming out sometime this year, 2021. Apparently,
Yay.
I'm about to shoot a really cool low-budget indie film called Scrap. That's inspired by a short version that we did a couple years ago. So that's really exciting, and starting to do concerts again safely in venues where there can be good protocols. So it's just amazing to get back in front of audiences in a live room safely So hopefully that can continue if people can take care of themselves. So be safe.
Mm-hmm.
You can find me at alexsegura.com. My next novel, Secret Identity, comes out in March from Flatiron Books on my birthday, actually. So it's like a present to myself. Yeah.
Sure.
It's set in comic books in the 70s. This woman, Carmen Valdez, moves from Miami to New York to work in comics, and she ghostwrites a character that becomes a huge hit, and her collaborator is murdered, so no one knows she's created this character. And so she has to solve the murder and reclaim the character, and their actual comic book pages interspersed in the story. So you're reading the prose, and you kind of read the comic that she's writing. It's everything about me in one book. It's comics and noir and Miami and New York and legacy and baggage that our family has put on us. So I'm excited about it. And that's my big thing.
Cool.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you everybody for joining. Buy books, buy these authors' books, buy them for Mysterious Galaxy thank you for hosting us.
Thank you, Jen.
So much.
Well, I want to thank
you.
all of you so much.
Thanks,
for
everybody.
joining us. Thank you for coming out on a Saturday and for all of the different time zones I'm sure that everyone is in. This was such a treat. Everyone, Sword, Stone, and Table is out. Make sure that you check it out and go read it. And this is a random side note as well, but from a reader, I know if you are ever in like a reading funk, reading anthologies and collection of short stories, I'm getting so many nods right now. I am not the only one. Woo! But reading short stories is such a beautiful and phenomenal way to like reinvigorate your reading as well. So that's another recommendation I have for it. Make sure you go check it out though, for all of the badassery and magicness and everything that you've heard today. So the pointy, and we will all see y'all next time. Have a phenomenal weekend. And for my fellow San Diegans, make sure you're going out and showing your love and support for Pride, because
All right.
celebrate and support all year, but definitely go loud and go hard on it this weekend. And we'll see you all next time. Goodbye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.